Curiosity is the opposite of focus. The biggest criticism of Cloudflare is we're a mile wide and an inch deep. And it's so much fun. Like, I love that. Can we make it super inexpensive to run thousands of experiments? We have a traditional product and engineering team, but we also have a sort of less traditional thing we call ETI. And their stated goal is to fail 90% of the time with 90% of the products that they launch. They don't meet that goal. They fail only 50% of the time. And I get mad at them because I'm like, you're not taking risks. And there are plenty of people that inside of Cloudflare who are like, we should focus more. And I'm like, that's a great way to build a nice $1 billion company. But if you want to build the next iconic technology company, you really do have to just keep taking on new things and just being okay. Like, it's got to be lots and lots and lots of small bets, but if they're successful, they can have big impacts. How do you take a small team and say, go build a new developer platform, and that's now turned into, what will be a multi-billion dollar, line of business for us.
Welcome back to the Slow Hunch. In this episode, I am thrilled to welcome my old friend, Matthew Prince, the CEO and co-founder of Cloudflare. Cloudflare is among the most important companies on the internet, processing large portions of internet traffic. We got to know Matthew from when we invested at USV back in 2013 at their Series C and have followed the journey for a long time. In this episode, we go all the way back to the kernels of Matthew's ideas that would later lead to Cloudflare. We spend a lot of time at the end talking about what's going on today on the internet, the relationship between internet content and AI, and what's happening with the business model of the internet as we move from a search-based internet economy to an answer-based internet economy. So I really hope you enjoy the conversation with Matthew Prince from Cloudflare. I don't know if you remember this, but I was in your office pre-IPO for one of the Cloudflare board meetings where you guys were doing a mock earnings call. And I thought that was so cool. It's actually the only time I've ever sat through that in a private company getting ready to go public. That was really cool.
Like it was only because we really, when Fidelity did our fourth round of funding, we pushed them on like, what we want you to treat us like a public company. What would you do? And they're like, okay, you want to be a public company? You should do actual earnings calls, scripted, give guidance, do the whole thing. And the first few, we were so bad. It was, but by the time we did our real earnings call, I think it was our 13th at that point. So it had been, over basically 3 years.
And I think there was the idea of having some analysts throw in some softball and also hardball questions.
That was the hardest thing. We couldn't find, because the VCs, one of the VCs, is that we live in a jurisdiction that doesn't have no fault divorce. So, so as a result, nobody tells each other the truth, but nobody wants to offend each other because it's like the pain of getting divorced is too high. So we had a very hard time finding people to ask hard questions. So
I remember that. First time I met you was, I think, 2012 or 2013 when you guys were raising the Series A, or Series C rather. And remember walking out of your office with our team thinking to myself, holy shit, what these guys are building is incredible, so powerful, and also so scary. Like, I hope we trust these guys to handle it the right way.
Very scary. We're very, very scary. I think we've handled it pretty well, mostly.
I think you have too. And so I know you've been, you're on the podcast circuit talking about, Cloudflare and your story. And I'll give you the setup for what the Slow Hunch is, and maybe we can cover some new ground or maybe look at it in a slightly different way.
I was trying to think about, because I've been thinking about it to some extent, like what my Slow Hunch has been. And I'm not sure it's, to build a better internet. And I haven't got this pithy, but let me try it with you, which is, because the thing that extends back before Cloudflare, that extends back before Unspam, was something around the idea that the internet is a bigger deal than people realize, and it's deeply flawed and needs to be fixed.
And what's interesting about that idea is it was true 20 or 30 years ago. It was true 15 years ago when we met each other. Certainly true today. So that's a big idea.
But because I like the very first, like if I think back to the first thing that I was like, what do I feel like I'm evangelizing that nobody else understands? It was that the internet, for the first time at scale, created the ability for people to commit crimes in a jurisdiction they didn't live in. Yeah, there's postal fraud and other things.
Yeah.
But it was that was pretty de minimis compared to what this unleashed. And you could actually commit a crime without even knowing you're committing a crime. Sending a like pornographic picture to an email address that happened to be, in Saudi, because you typoed it. And so all of a sudden you've got this thing that doesn't map to any of the sort of legal system. Like, how do you figure out jurisdiction? The original Unspam idea was, how do we map jurisdiction to email addresses? And then the way that turned into was, could you create do not call for email? But it was literally like, how can I say the rules of this email address are associated with Michigan or associated with Japan or whatever, but do it in a way without revealing everything that was on the list, because the scale thing was a big deal. And at some level, like that's all Cloudflare has done as well, is just think about, oh shit, we created this thing. It has a lot of amazing aspects to it, but it's creating a whole bunch of problems. How do we solve those problems?
Thank you for laying that out, because I think that's really good. And I'll give you another half of the idea of the Slow Hunch. It's not just a single thing that you've been working on for a long time, which is part of the idea. But the other part of the idea is that any one big idea or any one big breakthrough or accomplishment doesn't just happen. It's not just one idea. It's a half an idea that you're kind of noodling on for a while that maybe gets you there, maybe doesn't. And then if you're lucky, it collides with another half of an idea. And that collision and that second idea is actually the kind of the unlock that gets you somewhere. And that maybe happens, 10 or 20 or 1,000 times over the long arc of working on something. And so really what I'd love to do is talk about the big idea, but also talk about the moments, like go back as far as we can and try to remember where you had a half an idea and that half an idea collided with another half an idea. And like that was like a pop.
Yep. And it's still saying that I have uploaded 99%. So I have to send a note to the CEO of Comcast who fixed my internet.
He's like your cable guy.
It was really pretty amazing. He was like, hey, you just pushed a button and now your internet's faster. Can you check it? I was like, okay.
By the way, every once in a while something goes wrong with the internet, not just my internet, and I send you an email. So that you're my version of the Comcast CEO for fixing
what you
the
don't know
internet.
is behind the scenes, I'm just writing to like Comcast and AT&T and Verizon. Like, hey, Nick has a question again.
So you mentioned that idea about the internet's broken. There's something, it's important and it has things that need to be fixed. Do you remember when that first occurred to you in the smallest way? Like, when did you start thinking about things like that?
Right at the end of law school. So 2000.
And what was it that triggered that?
Spam had started to be a problem. It was spam. It was email spam. It was like, I was annoyed by email spam. That was a problem. Registered the domain Unspam. Created the original idea for Unspam was a disposable email service, which I was building while I was in law school, and where you could create email addresses and then you could assign them, and if you had spam to them, you could just turn them off.
Right, toss them. Yep.
And so that I guess that was probably the first. And then I got kind of interested, and then email was sort of this way that, you're communicating at potentially great distances without even knowing where the other person was or what rules applied. And then it was like the question of, oh gosh, how do I know what rules apply? How do you fix that? Well, you could you could say, here's a big list of emails and here are the rules that apply. Because you can't publish an ex ante or ex post. You have to do an ex ante. But then now you're revealing a big list of email addresses, which then just makes the spam problem worse. And so then it was like, we can use hashing in order to hash both the lists and compare it. So you'd only be able to compare the things that you are about to send to. But then it could give you additional information, like here's the jurisdiction that applies to it. And then, anyway, and then that led to Unspam, which then led to Project Honeypot, which then led to Clouflare. So
I am curious about the intersection between law school and thinking about this, right? Because a big part of that first idea was, one of the problems that the internet unleashes is this jurisdiction problem, which is kind of a legal way of thinking about things. That's not like a technocrat way of thinking about things.
No. And you think about I was so brainwashed by law school that all of the business ideas I had for a long time were, some version of they would all start with, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pass a law, which usually when you get those, people are excited about. And yet that was ultimately what Unspam's business was. But there was, I had a whole thing around, Google was making a ton of money selling other people's trademarks. So that if you're Colgate, if you typed Colgate in, then Google would sell that to Crest or whatever.
Yep.
And I was like, that doesn't seem right. And so how could you fix it? So I was like, well, let's just reform trademark law. And then I was like, that sounds hard. And then I was like, what if we just pass a whole new kind of version of trademark law? Because it turns out that there's state trademark law. So we'll go get the state of Utah to pass a law that says that if you register your trademark in Utah, then Google can't sell it. We got it passed. We forgot to put in it must be implemented by date. And then I made this mistake of calling a guy who was at AOL to say, hey, we just got this thing passed. Do you want to come work for us? There's this, we can build this business around it. And he told AOL, who told Google, and then Google descended, and they made a deal with the state where they invested a ton in the state in exchange for them not ever implementing the law. So I believe the law is still on the books. Maybe it eventually got repealed, but the system never got implemented, and Google invested a bunch in the state.
In the end, you were just doing some economic development work for your home state.
Yeah. And so if anybody else would like to do this, I highly advise lawmakers of Arizona to consider it. It's still a really it's a good way to just tax Google.
Is get them to build some, pleasant people and put some steel in the ground in your state. Well, that's actually, that's happening now in a new way, right? With all the AI data centers. Okay. So, law school spam, jurisdiction. I was pitching Michelle all these ideas that were sort of legally, and she was like, that's stupid. And then we were talking about Project Honeypot, and she was like, that's the thing to focus on. Well, let's talk about, if we may, the collision with Michelle, is like a big part of the Slow Hunch, right? It's like everything that was going on in your brain meets everything that was going on in her brain. And I think that's probably a pretty big deal. So where did you guys meet? And also Lee, for sure. You met Lee a little later, I think, or did you also meet Lee? Oh, okay.
Now, the story of Lee is, so we're building the Unspam, which is this jurisdiction do not call thing. And the whole thing relies on that we can file a patent and basically say to anyone who passes this, we've got this patent, so you have to contract with us. Because otherwise, how as a tiny startup are you going to win this government business? And we're in Policelis, the former Washington State Deputy Attorney General. We're in DC, she's speaking. I ask a question that's a very kind of leading question. It's at the FTC on this is why you should do not call lists. And this guy named Arthur Keller, who is an adjunct professor at UC Santa Cruz, came up and he pushes a piece of paper in my chest, and it's all captured on C-SPAN. And I turn white as I'm reading it. because the entire piece of paper is describing what he and his students have built. That's the thing that we just tried to patent.
Wow.
And so like Ben, the business partner, and I corner Arthur and sit him down in a bar, and our plan is to get him drunk and like convince him that he should be working with us. And the first thing he says is, "I don't drink," and so I was like, "Damn, that plan."
There goes that plan.
Yeah, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's do this together." I only have a few asks. Ask number one is, I want a relatively de minimis payment for me and students. Fine. Ask number two is we want a relatively de minimis amount of equity in the new venture. Fine. Ask number three is we want you to file a new patent naming us all as inventors. Fine. And ask number four is I have 4 students who have worked on this. You have to hire one of them.
Oh my God! Wow.
We're like,
Everything else but that.
And he's like, because we're like, well, maybe, but we're not going to promise.
Yeah, sure.
He really wanted us to hire this guy named Thomas Belote, who's one of the students, the youngest one. And we met at the patent office months later in Sunnyvale, California. And all the students came. One guy already had a job at Microsoft. One guy was moving back to Thailand or whatever. Still, Dat Nugent was still in touch with all these people. We made these people a ton of money. It's funny because they all got Cloudflare shares eventually.
Amazing.
Thomas Belote seems odd. Wasn't our person, and then the fourth person was Lee Holloway, and that was how we met Lee.
Wow. And well, so that's an amazing story for a whole bunch of reasons, right? So you're pursuing this idea from kind of a legalistic approach because you're a smart lawyer who's like thinking about the internet. You just happen to be down at the FTC. You happen to make noise, and you happen to get bum rushed by a professor who happens to have been researching the exact technical solution.
I mean, and this is the really crazy thing. He was in town because he was an expert witness on the eBay versus Bidder's Edge case, which was one of the really kind of seminal cases. And by the way, which is the case that also leads to eBay being forced to sell Skype. Like there's a ton of stuff that happens because of this. And that the judge, he was supposed to be in court that day, but the judge moved things around. And so he was just kind of figuring out what to do. And he heard about this FTC hearing and he came there. Had that not happened, like there's no way
Cloudflare would be no Cloudflare. That's incredible. And it's funny because it all starts with what are the problems in the internet. You guys are all down there sitting in DC because from a legal perspective, you're concerned about the way the internet's forming up.
And all these people are seeing things and there are a bunch of bad. I mean, it turns out. I mean, Unspam's still around, so I probably shouldn't say this too loudly. But do not call us for the email is kind of a dumb idea for all. Totally honest.
All right. So you met Lee, and so he's a graduate student working on.
He had just finished undergrad.
Okay.
He was consulting for some firm that was doing some work for Walmart. And I said, here's the deal. We have no money, but we have this idea. We're building a company in Park City, Utah. He didn't know how to ski or snowboard. Never really lived anywhere other than Cupertino. And I was like, so here's the deal. What if and we have no money, so we can't pay you. We'll agree that once we can pay you, here's what your salary will be. We'll go work on raising money. And you come and live in my basement and I will give you free housing and pay for all your meals. And he's like, yeah, that sounds good. And so, and so we built all of the original software and everything for Unspam from a couch in Park City, Utah, basically.
And how did Unspam become Cloudflare ultimately, or are they two completely separate?
No, Unspam was its own thing. It raised money from some investors. It raised $2 million. Still doing its thing. When we started Cloudflare, we wanted to hire Lee and then license data from Project Honeypot. And so we negotiated, which was complicated, but we had sort of this arm's length negotiation with Unspam that was like, okay, Unspam will own a small percentage of Cloudflare, in exchange for this license and you not suing us for poaching Lee. And so that small percentage turned out to be worth quite a bit of money.
And so then, I'm really curious to understand what happened when your sort of legal mind and Lee's more technical mind kind of collided. And then I'm also curious to understand how Michelle got into the picture and how Cloudflare, formed.
So I met Michelle in business school. What was unique about Michelle was that she was the opposite of me. Michelle has ego in the sense, in sort of the Freudian sense of ego, but she doesn't have any vanity. She's the sort of person who she doesn't take credit for ideas. But she really wants to get to what the right idea is. She's super organized. Like, she was a 6 Sigma black belt. And at Unspam, the two people that I had started the company with were friends from high school. We had lockers next to each other in high school, and we were all basically the same height and the same race, same education, same age, and we fought like dogs because we were all fundamentally fighting over who was in charge all the time, and I was like, okay, so that model doesn't work. It was sort of like that Seinfeld episode where George does all the things that are the opposite. I was like, what if I find like I was in a cohort in business school with 90 students, and there's some percentage of those people who are just, really, really, really obnoxious. So take those out. But if Michelle had a party and she'd had capacity for 50 people, there's no way I would have gotten in a fight. 60, I'm on the bubble. 70, I'm probably in.
She's aware of you, but
tried to set me up with her sister. So had respect. Thank God that didn't happen too.
And maybe not interest, because she could tell that you were high vanity and disorganized, completely the opposite of her.
I am pretty disorganized, and I have lots and lots of ideas, but I'm not always the best at getting them done. So this person has a set of skills that's very different from mine. And so I was like, I want to start a business with you. And meanwhile, I was running away from my dad's business and trying to not do that. And so I was trying to find something. Meanwhile, all this happens at kind of the same time. Lee calls me because he's still working for Unspam. I've taken a sabbatical to go to business school. Lee calls me and he's like, "Hey, you've always been really good to me." And I'm like, "No. Wait. And, he'd brilliant technical guy. And he'd gotten 2 offers. He got an offer from Facebook and he got an offer from Google. And I said, give me 2 weeks. I'll figure something out. And so I'm sort of negotiating with Michelle to figure out, and we're kind of brainstorming the idea and Project Honeypot, which is this thing that came out of Unspam. And it was like, okay, we're tracking the bad guys. Can we actually stop them? And at first we think we're going to build hardware, and then that doesn't make sense. And eventually we get to the cloud. And by the time we've kind of got it to, here's the idea, it's going to be put in the cloud, it's time for me to call Lee back. And he's been deferring kind of these Facebook and Google offers. And I call him back and I'm like, okay, here's how it's going to work. And I remember I was pacing up and down in Chase Hall, one of the dorms at HBS, and up on the top floor, and just walking him through the whole thing. And it was a monologue for 45 minutes or an hour, at the end of which I'm like, "You still there?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then there's just silence for 90 seconds. And he's like, "Yeah, okay, that'll work. Let's build that." and so he was on board. And then the funny thing was, Lee didn't know Michelle. Michelle didn't know Lee. I knew them both. And then we move out to Lee's in California and married to a woman there. And so we move, and we're like, yeah, Bay Area is probably the only place we can build this. So Michelle and I literally load a U-Haul up. My mom and I drive it across the country. We get to San Francisco, San Francisco. And then the company, the first office in Palo Alto. And Lee like is totally just kind of looking Michelle up and down the entire time, super skeptical and like, what is this? And he pulls me aside the first day and he's like, okay, I understand why you need me and I understand why I need you, but why do we need her? And I'm like, give it a month and let's see. And a month, like to the minute, a month later, Lee comes back and he's like, all right, I totally understand why I need her. Less clear why we need you. Exactly the right answer, but
amazing. And you kind of mentioned it in passing. The idea you ultimately settled on, which is sort of put it in the cloud. And by put it in the cloud, you mean kind of put the firewalls and the security and the intelligence in the cloud, off-prem or from on-prem into the cloud. And obviously that's related to the train of thought around security and the sort of way to do security. I'm kind of curious, like that idea that it sounds like you and Michelle sort of landed on and then sold Leon. How close to the idea for Cloudflare was that?
It was certainly the first 3 to 5 years. And then I think the thing that was interesting was because of what we did. So, okay, you want to put a firewall in the cloud. Great. But in order to make that work, you have to have a giant network that takes time to build, takes money to build. Big companies aren't going to trust you with it. But also you need data in order to populate the models to have the firewall actually do useful things. And so the question was, how do you get those things? And Michelle and I being business students were like, what if we made a free version? And Lee hated billing, so he loved that idea. And so we were. It's like anyone who wants to know why Cloudflare's billing systems are still so janky, 15 years later, the answer is because Lee hated billing, or accounting really is what Lee hated, so we then made it free. We thought a bunch of small businesses would sign up. Who actually signed up were every civil society organization in the world. So the next thing you know, we have every problem because all these actors are trying to take them. So then, because in the beginning we weren't a DDoS mitigation service because we were tiny, but then it was like, oh, I guess we got to go build that. But then it's free, and so we're like, well, because we were using a third-party DNS service, and the third-party DNS service, the bills kept going up, and so we're like, we can't do that. And so we tried to negotiate a flat fee, and they were like, no, we charge per domain, and they just wouldn't budge. So we're like, okay, I guess we've got to build a DNS service. None of those companies exist anymore that we were trying to partner with. Same thing with TLS. Why do we build a registrar? Because Network Solutions came this close to being hacked because of us, and we're like, we can't trust them, and we looked at everyone else. And so almost once that happened, it was like every week, like the very nature of what we were doing exposed every weakness that the internet had. And we've just sort of had to like, and now we'll solve that one, and now we'll solve that one, and now we'll solve that. Like, why do we build a developer platform? Like that was certainly never part of the original plan, except that we got to the point where it was so terrifying for us to release code because if we made a mistake, like airplanes couldn't land. Like literally in 2017, we had an outage and I got a call from a major transportation company and CEO, and they're like, hey, how long before you're back online? We're like, oh, we're so sorry. Really, really soon. Good. Because there are planes in the air right now. They're running out of fuel, and I was like, "Who's so stupid to like trust some startup with?" But anyway, it all worked out.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I think one thing that's interesting about this is clearly the story of Cloudflare is like build a little, see what happens, see what breaks, build a little more. I remember once at a USV investor day or annual meeting, you said something about, just making everything a little bit better every day. I think that's a really powerful approach, and it's in some ways like the whole point of the idea of the slow hunch. On the other hand, like it could draw you out of focus. And so, as you're in this mode of fixing all the things that need to get fixed and breaking all, uncovering all the broken shit on the internet, how do you decide like that's not our job to fix or that's our job to fix? Because I think of, in some ways, Cloudflare is a pretty focused product. even though you
Really?
do kind of a little bit of everything.
No. Like our core values are transparency, being principled, and then curiosity. Curiosity is the opposite of focus. And we're like the biggest criticism of Cloudflare is we're a mile wide and an inch deep. And it's so much fun. Like I love that. Now Michelle, to some extent, is the person who sort of says, okay, but where she gives me rope and the team rope is, can we make it super inexpensive to run thousands of experiments? And we have a traditional product and engineering team, but we also have a sort of less traditional thing we call ETI. And their stated goal is to fail 90% of the time with 90% of the products that they launch. Now they don't meet that goal. They fail only 50% of the time, and I get mad at them because I'm like, you're not taking risks. But there are plenty of people that inside of Cloudflare who are like, we should focus more. And I'm like, that's a great way to build a nice $1 billion company. But if you want to build the next iconic technology company, you really do have to just keep taking on new things and just being okay. Like it's got to be lots and lots and lots of small bets, they're small bets, but if they're successful, they can have big impacts. So how do you take a small team and say, and go build a new developer platform, and that's now turned into, what will be a multi-billion-dollar, line of business for us.
I mean, I've always actually thought that Cloudflare itself is sort of like a living Slow Hunch, because you have this massive network that collects data from the patterns of everything and is able to cross-reference them and turn that into intelligence, right? And that's sort of the definition.
Someday we'll build a hedge fund. I'm teasing.
I guess maybe just to sort of move the timeline forward a little bit, can you think of any moments where like big changes happened at Cloudflare that some bigger new piece of information or insight or thing hit you on the head and you're like, oh shit, like now it's this?
Well, I think when we made encryption free, that was a really big, that was terrifying because the thing that differentiated our paid plans from our free plan was encryption. And so if we made that free, why was anyone going to sign up? Not to mention, like, how could we make the economics work? How could we make the technology work? That was so hard, but it was one of these things that we did it because we really were principled and believed in the mission of helping build a better internet. So that was what we decided to do. And it worked out amazingly. I think there are other times, like when we just hit walls, our deployment process was so difficult and so brittle that we'd save up just a ton of stuff, and then when you rolled it out, inevitably a problem would happen, and we couldn't figure out how, using any existing kind of deployment strategies, we could make it work. And so as a result, kind of Kenton Varda sat down with me and John Graham Cumming, who was our CTO at the time, at a little Mexican restaurant across from our office in San Francisco, and sketched out. It's one of those napkins. It was a placemat, salsa stains all over it. He's like, "Here's how a modern developer platform should work," and we're like, "Okay, go build that." And he and like one other guy went in a corner and just banged this thing out. And it became this big thing, and it made Cloudflare massively more stable. It accelerated our own ability to develop things. And then as we explained what we were doing to customers, they started to say, well, can we use that too? Customer zero for everything we do is us. And it's not like we don't have, Harvard MBAs who are writing up business cases on why this is going on. Well, we sit down and we're like, okay, here's a problem. How can we go solve it? And then we figure out how to make a business out of it, later. And I was listening to some, I know Elon Musk a little bit. I don't know him super well. We're certainly not close. But and there's lots of things to criticize about Elon, But one of the things that's really, I think, admirable is that he starts with the problem and how to solve the problem, and then kind of backs into whatever the business is, as a secondhand thing. And I'm like, that's very much how I end up approaching these things as well, which is like, we got to go solve this thing because it's an important thing. And for us, it's usually because if we don't solve it, Cloudflare will die. And then it turns out, oh, other people have the same problem. Let's go sell it to them too.
So, but for those who don't know exactly how Cloudflare works, this is a kind of an interesting example. So, you push servers out deep into the internet, into the ISPs, and you run software on those to kind of keep track of internet traffic and perform services like making the internet faster and safer and protecting things and speeding them up. And part of why pushing code in that way is so hard because you're pushing code onto machines like all over the world in someone else's environment. And
a lot of machines.
And then to then flip that into, now we know how to run code at the edge, and then you have this platform to let other people run code at the edge because they might want to. That's big. But I want to get to something you said, another thing you said one time, which still just like lives in my head rent free. Basically, in the early days of Cloudflare, you would have to pay the ISPs to hold that Cloudflare boxes. And at some point, they started getting so much benefit that they started paying you. And
pay us stuff for free,
or at least gave it to you for free. And the chart you would always show is this rapidly declining cost curve. And I think of that so many times with so many other companies where I'm just like, the goal, if you're doing something really big on the internet, the goal is to have some sort of cost curve that looks like this and sort of approaches zero as your business scales.
And you have to, and it's why, so first of all, it's why people who are building on top of the hyperscalers, and especially if they're things like bandwidth dependent, like people are like, are you worried about those companies? I'm like, no, because we'll always have a lower cost to serve customers, and whoever has the lowest cost to serve customers over the long term always wins. Like, yeah, there can be flashy UI today, something else, but that stuff can all get replicated. What can't get replicated is the underlying cost advantage. And so we were just obsessed about costs early on. But why were we obsessed about costs? Because we had all these stupid free users who weren't paying us. Like we literally had to, otherwise we were dead. So it literally had to figure out a way. Whereas if instead, a lot of our competitors were like, okay, we're charging, our customer, it costs us this much to serve a customer. We want to have this much margin, so we're going to charge them, cost plus effectively. For us from the beginning, cost plus didn't work because there was just all this cost from these free users. And so you had to smash that down. What was interesting though, was that the best way to smash those costs down for lots of different reasons often turned out to be, how do you solve really hard problems on the internet? How do you make the internet itself better? So for instance, there are 13 root servers on the internet. The reason there are 13 is because that's the maximum number that can fit inside of an internet packet. They were assigned back in the 80s to a bunch of just ragtag organizations. Really everyone from like the University of Maryland to NASA to, it is not who you would choose to run it. And these are super important because like if you have www.domain.com, you get to choose where www points. VeriSign that runs the .com registry gets to choose where domain.com points. But the question is, who gets to choose where .com points? And the answer is these 13 root servers. And so everything you do on the internet, the very first thing that happens is there's a query to one of these root servers. So every email you send, every link you click, everything that's out there. So we got the opportunity to not take them over. The independent organizations still run them, but we run the infrastructure for 2 of the 13. We make no money off of that. We don't get paid for it. We don't do it. We do it as a service. Why did we decide to do it? Because we were like, well, we can make these things faster and make them much more resilient. And that's just the right thing to do. And so let's find a way to run it across our entire network. But what does that then do? Again, if we were smarter, we would have had a bunch of NDAs be like, oh, if you ran 2 root servers, then every ISP in the world would love to put your equipment in the ISP. because then the ISP immediately gets faster. We weren't that smart, but it turned out that that was the case. And so time and time and time again, we found that if we make the internet better, it fundamentally drives down the costs of servicing our customers, which allows us to serve a broader customer base. And, is that flywheel that keeps us going forward.
That's an amazing story. What was the ability to serve root servers the main thing that caused the ISPs to want to bring you in, or was it one of a bunch?
The stories are, it's like what I remember Pakistan Telecom. Everyone was like, Pakistan Telecom is impossible to work with. And I'm like, yeah, but we're serving a lot. Pakistan's a big country. We're serving a lot of traffic to it. We'd serve it from like Frankfurt or something, because the way that's where they backhaul traffic to. And it was like, and the question was, do you invest more in Frankfurt, where we probably were in, some Equinix facility or something that you would have to pay for the space. And I was like, why can't we put servers in Pakistan? And they're like, because they've kicked everyone out. They kicked Google out, they kicked Facebook out, they kicked everybody out. There's no way they're going to let us in. And then like a week after I've had this conversation with the network team, I'm on one of the email aliases that gets requests for new networks I was at the time, I'm probably not anymore, to peer with us, to allow us to get in, as the director of network for Pakistan Telecom. And he's like, hey, we'd love to host Cloudflare servers. Could you send them to us? And, I can't resist. So I write back, hello, director, whatever your name is. I'd heard you were quite difficult, so I'm surprised from this request. Can you tell me what motivated you to do this? And he's like, oh yeah, absolutely. He's like, I'm a huge fan of cricket. And the Pakistani national team uses us. And I'm sick and tired of backhauling the traffic to Frankfurt. So send us the servers, we'll install them tomorrow. And so there's story after story after story about those things where, because we had this, tens of millions of sites that were on us, there's always something that matters to the local network administrator or the local politician or the local whatever that because we've been kind of good stewards of the overall internet and service the overall internet, that's then allowed us to, continue to build that network out. But again, it was never, there's no time in which we were like, gosh, if we just went and pitched to, London Gorilla Society, that, Safaricom would let us in. But it happened because of that initial decision of just how do we continue to serve everyone on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good thing you didn't hire too many MBAs to give you any ideas about these problems outside of the two of you. Yeah.
We have two, which was plenty for us.
That's enough.
I'm sure I'm sure now recruit from Harvard and Stanford and it's great, but it is not the culture at Cloudflare where it's like, let's go build the 100-page business case with 16 supporting spreadsheets. We're much more, is this the right thing to do? Then we should probably do it. And if it turns into a business later than then that's fantastic.
I love that. It's compass, not map, or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's right. It's like directionally. How did we get convinced to make encryption free? Which took away again the one reason why people would upgrade. It was because one engineer kept pounding the table saying, if we really believe in our mission, a better internet is a more encrypted internet. So figure out how to do it. And it was super hard. Like, let's encrypt and exist. None of this stuff existed. So we had to invent all of it. And it took away that. But we were like, yeah, he's right. Either we believe in our mission or we don't. And if we don't, then, that sucks. So the compass points that way. So let's go figure it out. And we were like, may or may not work, but thankfully it did.
We've been talking about sort of like the last 10, 15 years of the journey. We're at a super interesting place now looking forward, where a lot of things that were true about the way the internet has been working for the last 10 years are starting to be quite different. And I'm referring to, crawling and scraping and training AI models and agents.
Fundamentally, the switch from search engines to answer engines. Like that's what's driving all of this change.
And you guys are right in the middle of that. Fundamentally, you protect publishers, or you protect sort of the owners of the websites, right? Like that, they're your customers. There's this question of who gets to read the internet, is it free or not free? And there's a little bit of a use case around consuming content to train models, and then there's another use case which is just more agentic, kind of bot-driven systems accomplishing tasks on the internet without humans. And how are you feeling about that, and what do you think is the right answer for some of the challenges that this is presenting?
I hadn't really thought about this until I knew I was coming on your show. But there's sort of a thread that's kind of pulls through all of this, which is, even back when I was, working on Unspam or when we did the Trademark Protection Act thing, it was all about what's the underlying business model of the internet? How do you make money off of it? Who should make money off of it? And what Michelle, when I was pitching her on ideas, she was like, Matthew, all of your ideas are basically just about how you can tax Google. And like, you just got to get over that, right? That's not, there's no good that comes of that. And I think that, when you and USV and Fred and Brad and came in to hear kind of about Cloudflare the first, you'd actually made the investment. It was after the investment had happened. You came in and you're like, okay, so what are some new ideas? And we're like, we think we can build an ad network, and here's how it's going to work. Da, 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 da. And I remember just how unbelievably disgusted the USV team was. And I think it was Brad who was like, Matthew, your problem is that if you are starting to sell the visitors for your customers, where let's say your customers are, New York Times, and you build an ad network where somebody can target New York Times customers and you're selling it, you're actually adverse to your customers. And the thing you need to remember is that's not your data. And I was just like, and because again, lots of people over the years, every ad company came to us and said, if you'll just sync cookies, or if you just do this, or you just do that, we'll pay you a ton of money. And I remember always thinking, no, Brad said that's not our data. And it's just, and it isn't, it's our customers' data. But I think but what we were trying to figure out was there's gotta be a better way of doing this, because the way Google is doing it, which is largely they generate traffic through search, and then they help you monetize traffic through ads. And again, that is what has funded the last 25 plus years of the internet. But it feels kind of deeply icky at some level, because traffic has always been this really horrible proxy for value. And I mean, every time I say this, so I keep saying it because I sort of enjoy the angry phone calls, but I get angry phone calls from Google execs when I say everything that's wrong in the world today is Google's fault. It's a little strong. But Google taught us to worship the deity that is traffic. That beget Facebook, which beget TikTok, which, we're kind of going down this sort of attention economy hole, and it doesn't feel like it's getting better. It feels like it's getting worse. And I think a lot of us long for kind of the internet of old, which was quirkier and more local and, just more fun in a lot of ways. And so I think that's all been going through my head for quite some time. Having grown up on, the internet and kind of come of age on it. And now watch, what's gone right and what's gone incredibly wrong. And so when you have these sea change moments, which we're living through right now, where we're switching from search engines, which gave you a treasure map, and then you clicked on the links and you went and you found your answers, to answer engines, which, and let's be clear, for 95% of users, 95% of the time, it is a better user interface. And so like the question isn't like, is this going to happen or not? Of course it's going to happen, because it's a better user interface. And so we're going to switch. But answer engines, because they don't give you a treasure hunt, they just give you the answer. They don't generate traffic. And if they don't generate traffic, then all of the business model for the people who depended on that traffic breaks. And so, again, regardless of what Cloudflare does, like something is going to change on the internet. Either all the things that depended on traffic are going to wither away and die. That's sad. That's sort of I think of that as a very bad outcome.
I'd say there's probably a subset of that is just fine, because there's a bunch of clickbaity, kind of garbage filled SEO optimized slop. Yeah, but
there's also a bunch of really incredibly important journalists.
Indeed,
that
absolutely, 100%.
The world depends on, and it's the clickbaity stuff, which is like, yes, we should that you want to go away, but you want more of the journalists, you want more researchers, you want more original content, more local, quirky, original content, right? That's out there.
Yep.
Second version of the future, which is I think more likely, but maybe equally bleak, is that we're going to go to a world where there are 5 major AI companies, and they each hire and control their own fleet of journalists, researchers, academics to fill in and feed data into their systems. And there will be a conservative one and a liberal one and a Chinese one, right? But how regressive of that? That's not going back to the media times of the 1900s. That's going back to the media times of the 1400s. That's the meta cheese, right? And sure, Leonardo da Vinci did a bunch of cool stuff, but if you did anything that pissed off, Mr. Medici, like you weren't publishing, right? And so I think that's a pretty scary thing. And yet, like, can you imagine Sam Altman at OpenAI spinning up a version of the Associated Press? I can, right?
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of out-of-work journalists. Bureaus actually aren't that expensive, and they've got a ton of money. And so at some point, if these systems need original content, and there's still work for reporters to do, and no matter how many of these sort of hyper AI maximalists say, like, drones can't replace them yet, and won't be able to in certainly my life. And so you could imagine that in the future, the AI companies realize that the thing that is going to differentiate one from another is not going to be the algorithms, it's not going to be access to GPUs. It's going to be access to original content. And they will say, we're going to invest, we're going to become the studio model, but of AIs. And I think that's really scary. Not as scary as the first one, but it seems more probable. The alternative, I hope, is that we find some way where we say, listen, the same way that when you pay for Netflix, some percentage of your subscription goes to the filmmakers, same way when you pay for Spotify, some percentage of your subscription goes to the music creators. When you pay for OpenAI, when you pay for Google Gemini, when you pay for Microsoft Copilot, some percentage of what you're paying should go back to the people that actually created the content, which is the fuel that runs these systems. And what's amazing about that, I think, is done right, then that is a set of incentives that doesn't go for what is the most clickbaity thing, but instead, what is the piece of information that actually fills a gap in this market? And if you could get a feedback loop where the AI companies could say, listen, you're not an employee, but here's a whole bunch of questions that were asked that we don't have very good answers for. It'd be great if you went out and did some research on it, and we'll pay you if you do, right? We'll reward you. Like, I flew to Stockholm to meet with Daniel Ek, who I think is first a genius, and secondly is compensated creators at scale, maybe like nobody ever. And the story that keeps sticking with me is he said, he's founder of Spotify, and he said, the Spotify, we take the search queries that people search for, and if they search for like Taylor Swift, Shake It Off, we have a high degree. We return something, and we're like 100% like we can answer that query. But for a lot of queries, people search for like, I'd like kind of a country music song about what it's like to install a roof on a house in New York City. I don't know. There's no good answer for that, right? So they publish those back to music creators, and there are music creators. He told me that story of this one music creator who makes 40 million euros a year just writing songs for unfulfilled Spotify queries. He's like, there are lots of people making millions of dollars with this. And I think that's beautiful. Like, I think that's certainly more beautiful than, with all due respect to Ben Smith, BuzzFeed, which literally was A/B testing headlines for what generated the most cortisol. And so I hope that as we think about this, and we shift from search engines to answer engines, that there's an opportunity for us to create a business model that is not rewarding rage bait, but is instead rewarding actually furthering human knowledge or filling in the places we have gaps that people are really searching for answers or emotion or connection around.
And ideally doing that in let's call it an open way. And what I mean by that is that we're already starting to see the proprietary deals between UGC content platforms and the big AI companies, which is sort of like a 2.5 future in year 1, 2, 3, where it's like the AI companies own it all and those are sort of creator rails. I think in a better version of that, if I'm a creator publishing whatever I'm publishing in a good way, all the AI companies can read it. They can all pay me for it in proportion. They all have equal access to it, versus these sort of backroom type of deals or proprietary type of deals.
I think that and we're trying to engage like the leading like academic market designers and economists and others, because getting the market design right here, I think, is so important. Ideally, you want tons and tons and tons of participants on the AI side, and you want tons and tons and tons of participants on the creator side. And there are lots of things you could do that would be wrong. So a simple but almost clearly certainly wrong version of this is just a token costs X. The problem with that is that, first of all, it will create all kinds of incentives to create just incredibly spammy behavior. But in addition to that, it will also mean that whoever is big today will win in this market, because they have the ability to pay for the most data. And so I think at some level, the pricing mechanism for what this is has to be based on how big are you as an AI company. So it's got to be some fraction. You collect X in subscriptions, and so you pay for it in this way. Or maybe it's you have this many monthly active users, therefore it's this amount per monthly active user per month or year or whatever it is. Because again, you want the new startup to pay a little, and you want Google
to have access.
And you want Perplexity to play something in between those things. And because otherwise, you don't want a world in which all of the AI companies concentrate down into 5 or fewer, and you don't want a world in which all the content concentrates down into just Meta, right? You actually want a really robust system that can reward and incent whoever's creating knowledge that furthers human knowledge. And what's amazing is, for the first time in human history, we have a mathematical model of human knowledge, but we also have a mathematical model of where the holes are in human knowledge. And that should give us a map for what are the things that would be the best for us to invest in creating content around, yes, to further human knowledge, but also to make the AI systems better.
Well, and we're only going to be able to respond to that map if we have AI systems that we can kind of trust and balance off of one another, because you can't leave it to one or two, to decide what holes to fill and what holes not to fill. I think that's another risk in this category.
Another mistake, so let's pretend that Cloudflare plays sort of a central role in this, and you could substitute lots of other companies for Cloudflare, but I've thought about it from the Cloudflare perspective, so let's just think about it. So if Cloudflare's sitting in the middle, one way we could do this is we could build a ranking system that ranks the quality of content and the authority of content, and then we could publish that back to the AI companies and say, in the last hour, the following pieces of content have been met. This one is at the top of the list, and then this is number 2, and this is number 3. That's a terrible outcome as well, because you don't want one centralized provider saying what content is good or bad. So what we're building is actually a pluggable system where each AI company can take a sliver of their algorithm and give it to us, and then we will run their algorithm against content, And the way we've sort of framed it is it should be how much of it is unique to the sort of knowledge map that you have, and then how much of it is authoritative based on whatever your score is for authority. And Google will have a different score than Microsoft, which will have a different score than OpenAI. And that they'll all map that. And then we will give them each in the last hour, based on your algorithm, here's the things that will be different. And a app that's or a chatbot that's trying to be like the world's perfect doctor will have different things that it prioritizes than one that's trying to be, a chatbot for, lonely teenage girls, right? And so like Taylor Swift scores really high in the lonely teenage girls, like a new album comes out or something like that. A study on acetaminophen scores really high for the doctor's app. And so you actually want each different LLM to be able to say, we, based on what market we're going after, what user feedback we get, what we care about, we're going to rank knowledge based on what we do. And those algorithms exist. That's how pruning algorithms work. That was the great innovation of DeepSeek, right? Was they were just better at pruning things. And I think that's but you have to have the thing that is creating the wall be able to have many different ways of scoring content based on the many different LLMs that are out there.
So you're talking about really trying to make a marketplace architecture to sit in the middle of this in a way that's fair. I know I imagine you're getting a fair bit of pushback on these ideas, maybe from all sides, or not.
Way less than you'd think. It's really interesting. So from the publisher side, again, people can quibble about, here's how you should do it, or here's how you won't. And I think there will be more of that to come. But I think I start with, there's a problem, we need to solve it. And again, I don't know exactly what the solution will be, but I do know that it starts with scarcity. It starts with markets don't exist unless there's scarcity. There's no market for air because there's plenty of air. Right now, there's no market for content, or at least, relatively recently, there was a market for content. We created one by creating scarcity for some of the content. And the interesting feedback that we're getting early on is that the models that everyone's using today were trained on data largely that ended in the latest kind of January, February of 2025. We pushed the button to stop training starting July 1st of 2025. And what we're hearing is that the next generation of models are kind of hit a plateau. And that one of the internal reasons they think about it is that there's actually a big chunk of the internet that just disappeared from their training sets. Now, there are some people who, how true that is or not, I don't know. But what we've heard is that from the publisher side, they're like, this is great. A whole bunch of the AI companies that wouldn't engage before are now engaging because they realize, oh, you're serious about this and you're going to do something about it. Like that seems like just a huge positive. On the AI company side, not everyone, but the vast, vast majority and the most reputable of the AI companies are all saying, we get it. Someday we definitely are going to have to pay for content. What we care about, though, is it has to be a fair and level playing field. And that's why, I think charging based on MAUs is much better than just charging based on tokens because that's more fair, right? But the big one that every company, every AI company that's out there, the company that they all name as the company that they're most afraid of, and the one that they think doesn't have a level playing field right now is Google. And again, I think Google has been, even though they're responsible for everything that is wrong with the world today, sort of. I actually think that they have been a great patron to the internet. I think that they have really pushed. The web wouldn't exist anywhere close to what it looks like today if not for Google. And I believe that they really believe in an ecosystem. And all of the internal things that we hear is there is a great debate inside of Google of, okay, what do we do next? And they've already admitted in court, in legal documents, that they see the web decaying because of it. And so they're worried about it. And I think they genuinely are worried. And so the question over this is not whether or not we'll get them to pay for content. I think we will one way or another be able to force them to do that. What I'm hopeful is that they will step up and say, this is the right thing. We need to be supporting the ecosystem. This new way of doing it is that. And I think it'd be great if they said, listen, for every dollar that someone spends on Gemini or every, for every AI overview that we put up, we're going to actually say we'll pay some relatively large sum into a pool that goes back to compensate the creators. That then will create an enormous challenge around figuring out exactly how that large sum gets doled out. But the first step is create scarcity. We've done that. 2, get Google to play by the same rules as everyone else. I'm confident that that's going to happen in the next year for sure. And I'm actually confident sooner than that. And then 3, it's going to be now get everybody else to play by it. But what we've heard is if Google will do it, we'll do it too. And so really the pressure is on Google to say, do you want to actually continue to be the patron of the internet or not? And I hope that they'll do the right thing.
Well, it's a little bit, and you mentioned Spotify, right? I mean, it's a little bit like the way Spotify doles out revenues, where they get paid by listeners, and then they pass money to the labels, but also to the artists, right? And you could argue about whether the way that they divvy that up is fair. And I'm actually going to have a guest on this show shortly, where that's what we're going to talk about specifically in the music business. So this will be a good tee up, but the basic idea of if you're doing inference from a large language model, who are the creators behind that? It's the creators of the language that were used in the training, right? And today we don't really think about it that way, and it's certainly not. The marketplace is not designed that way.
Yeah, well, and so two points. The first is if you're an LLM today, there are 3 things that you need access to. 2 of which you pay a lot for, 1 you get for free. I think over time, the first 2 you will pay less for, and the last one will be the thing that actually defines your moat. So the first 2 today are access to GPUs, right? But it's silicon. What happens to markets of silicon over time? Like they turn into commodities. And yes, I know they seem like magical silicon today, and it seems like NVIDIA is the only one that can do it. I guarantee you that there's going to be more providers of silicon, and that $1 spent on silicon GPUs tomorrow will go a lot further than $1 spent today. And so we're in a weird place, but all silicon markets behave that way, and the same thing will be true. Second is researchers. And you just have to acknowledge that, like, if you were getting a PhD in artificial intelligence 4 years ago, you were a weirdo. People were literally saying, like, why are you wasting your time on this? Because in the 70s and 80s, this was the really hot research area that went nowhere. And so your career was over if you were doing this. Now, it turned out, what happened since, but we have this scarcity, but the scarcity is in part because this was a backwater of most academic.
It's a legacy scarcity. It's not going to be a scarcity in a few more years.
Scarcity in a long time. So silicon's going to get cheaper, and researchers are going to get easier to find. And so that leaves the third leg of the stool, which is content. And I think that over time, the AI companies are going to look more like Netflix or YouTube, where what differentiates them is what content they have access to. And where you and I think will disagree is, like, you would want everyone to have access to everything at some price. My hunch is that there's going to be some exclusivity deals where, Taylor Swift comes out with a new song. There are 5 different LLMs for
sure.
American Girls. There's an auction.
Yeah. It's just like it is in media, in video content today. Right.
Exactly. And so like you should have that, but I think that's going to be something that over time, that access to content is going to be the thing that actually differentiates the different AI companies. And that then gives me hope that we might be in a golden age of content creation. Because here's the other thing. The New York Times and Reddit both do AI deals. If you look at their total catalogs, they have roughly the same number of tokens between the 2 of them. But Reddit, for the same number of tokens, got 7 times as much as the New York Times. And again, I like the New York Times. I was a subscriber to the New York Times. But why is it? And I think the answer is because the difference from a LLM's perspective, between the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the FT, the Nikkei, the London Times, not that significant.
It's the same story written in the same style, kind of repeated. Whereas what you see out on something like Reddit is, I mean, you could argue that there's the same crap everywhere on Reddit. There's great stuff on Reddit, and it's all different everywhere.
And if you don't have Reddit, you don't have that. And in the, like, again, I think that those of us who have, some gray hair and miss the internet of old, what we miss is more Reddit, right? More, and not, like, it doesn't have to be Reddit, but just quirky, different, interesting stuff. Which
original content. Let's call it original content.
Original, right? Local, quirky, creative content. If we have a different monetization model that monetizes based on how much, if you imagine, like it's a sponge, right? And human knowledge is a sponge. There's a lot of sponge, but there's a lot of holes in the sponge too. If we actually say you'll get paid if you fill in one of the holes, then I think that leads to actually a more quirky, a more local, a more interesting internet going forward. And that's what I'm super excited. Like it's going to be a mess for a little bit, but what this comes out the other side, if we get it right, if we have lots of content sellers, if we have lots of content buyers, if we have a fair marketplace that gets to reward that in a way which makes sense, then what I'm excited about is I really do think we're at the golden age of content creation, and that not only does that save the internet, but it's back to everything's wrong. Why is populism on the rise? Why are we so divided? Why are people literally getting shot over, what they say? Like super, super scary stuff. I think a lot of it comes back to, we have just created a society where you get rewarded for rage. Whereas if you get rewarded for like intellectual content creation, no matter what, it won't solve all the world's problems, but it'll solve some of them. And I think that's what, makes me so excited right now.
That is an incredible conclusion. And back to the very beginning, here we are 25 years later, we have a whole new set of problems that are bigger and more widespread and probably harder to solve and worse for the world than we've ever seen before. And at the same time, maybe there's an optimistic, take on using the same moment to like fix a lot of that stuff.
Well, and if you're out there, like, and you're an entrepreneur, or you're a creator, you're anyone that's there, like, you don't get these moments in time very often. Like, I mean, I feel like I've got to live through, the internet came online, and then you got, you've got social, and then you got mobile, and then, blockchain, crypto, sort of, but this one is like one of these, like, whoa, for this big thing, the user interface is going to change. Inherently, that means the business model is going to change, and that's going to create incredible disruption, but it's also going to create incredible opportunities. And I think, what I think is so interesting is, like, how do we think through what those opportunities are, and how, again, I am confident that we will make money if we make the internet better, if we make sort of content creation better. But what motivates me is, how do we actually make content creation better? How do we create the incentives in such a way that the content that we all hope is being created is going to get created, and not just a bunch of rage-baity garbage?
I love that. And I also like the fact that, I would say the sort of naive and maybe mostly widely held view is that this is not the golden age of content. It's the dark age of content, where human created content is no longer valued because everything else, so much can be created by AIs. And it's really interesting to think that there's a super important role for high quality human content in the next turn of the internet. And I think that's a little bit counterintuitive right now.
Yeah, it is so obvious to me that it's right, that I find it strange that nobody else feels like they're seeing it. But that has to be the case, because again, Reddit got paid 7 times as much as the New York Times, and that's like that is the system voting in a way, and my hunch is that spread is just gonna expand.
Amazing. All right, Matthew, thank you so much for being here today. This was tremendous. I always enjoy our conversation so much. We could go on forever.
You just have to make sure that, afterwards you text me and tell me how full of shit I am. So
yeah, no, I will. Steady stream of shit talk coming over text from here on out. But seriously, thank you so much.
Thanks.
I think this is going to be awesome.
you.